Welcome to our continuing webinar series. One life, if we can save one life, is the result of doing this webinar series and the message sinking in across North America. This will all be worth it, and I really appreciate everybody who has gotten on to all of our webinars, particularly the ones focused on addiction prevention and suicide prevention, as it is a ridiculously important topic. The focus today involves a deep dive into creating a culture of caring that we've been talking about these many months. And we welcome back the Teatros team for their second appearance here. Today, they focus on a more practical guide to addressing these two huge problems. I'm Kevin Hilton, I'm the CEO of Impact. And before we turn it over to the Chief of Staff of the Ironworkers, Kevin Burns, and the subject matter experts from Teatros, I want to ask you a favor. If you would go on to the Impact website, www.impact-net.org, we've featured the recently published General President's letter that appears in the Ironworker magazine, and of course it's from Eric Dean, the Ironworker General President. And I just want to cue this up a smidgen. It really needs no introduction. It's very personal. To me, it's very inspirational, and it has very real world impact to the words. So again, it can be found on the Impact website. It can be found on the Ironworker website under the magazine tab. And of course, if you get the magazine at your home, it's right there on the inside cover. It's well worth a few minutes to read. Trust me, please, on that. So housekeeping for today's webinars, just like all of our others, it'll be no longer than 60 minutes. We want to be very respectful of your time. We only monitor the Q&A box, but we welcome those questions, and all of those questions will be answered one way or the other, either live on here in the Q&A period or after the fact. So if you want it answered, for sure, make sure you identify yourself so we can follow back up with you. As we've always done, we've recorded every one of our webinars, so it will be uploaded to the website in the next day or so, depending on how quick it renders. We're going to go through roughly 45 minutes of presentation, then we'll get into the Q&A and we'll wrap up after that. But keep in mind, if you have a question, we're going to get to it one way or the other. We just need to know who to reach out to beforehand. And the slides will be made available. The video will be made available. And of course, you can reach out to the Impact office or Kevin Burns, or of course, the Teatros subject matter experts by all means. But today we wanted to start out with a short 3-minute video that was produced by Ironworker Local 7 out of Boston, who's very passionate about this subject. And right after that, I'll turn it over to Chief of Staff Kevin Burns. So if we could run the video, I think it's a great example of what's happening out there.
At Ironworkers Local 7, solidarity means we stand with each other. And it means when times are tough, we have our brothers and sisters there with us. I know I speak for everyone at Local 7 when I say we've got your back.
Local 7 made sure I didn't have to go through a tough time alone. I learned about the Monday night meeting at Local 7. I started going every Monday. My life now that I'm sober is less chaotic, more serene. I'm able to be a husband, a father, a son, a brother, basically a responsible adult just from using the program of AA here at Local 7. It's hard right now. Lots of us can feel isolated and stretched thin. It can be hard to stay sober or clean even without a global pandemic. But in the tough times we're facing right now, drugs and alcohol are going to make it even worse. I encourage every member who feels alone to reach out.
At the worst of my addiction, my struggle looked like insanity day in and day out, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I started attending every week. Even if I had class, I would talk to my teachers and they would let me out to come down and attend the meeting that's here, to know that I have other brothers and sisters that are dealing with the same things that I'm dealing with, that I can go to and see either here at the hall or on the job site. Local 7's AA meeting saved my life. Everyone there was looking out for me, not just on the job site, but through thick and thin, no matter what.
Whether it's coming to Local 7's weekly AA meetings or taking advantage of the modern assistance resources, there's help for every member and their families too. We're brothers and sisters. That's what we do. Local 7's AA group meets every Monday to work towards recovery together. You can contact me, Business Agent Mike Doucette, for more information. Our benefits also cover counseling, recovery treatment options, and other mental health support for you and your family. Our team in Modern Assistance is ready to support you.
For over 30 years, our team has provided employee assistance, mental health support, and substance abuse treatment. We know how stress, family, work, and bills can add up. We can provide one-on-one counseling and connect you to the resources you need. And we haven't slowed down during COVID-19. Our telehealth options make it possible for confidential, face-to-face counseling, no matter where you are located. Whether you just want to talk or you're looking for treatment, you can reach us 24 hours a day, every day of the year at 800-878-2004 or visit us online at modernassistance.com.
None of us are ever strong enough that we don't need help sometimes. Winston Churchill said, "We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give." Local 7 is a family, and like a family, we have your back no matter what you're struggling with. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much to all the officers and the New England District Council President, Sean Neely, for putting that short video together and sharing that information. And a special shout out to those members that stepped up and talked about it. My name is Kevin Burns. I'm Chief of Staff for the Ironworkers International. And on behalf of General President Dean, myself, and all the locals here at the International, I just want to thank everyone for logging in today and listening to this important topic. With that, let's go to the important people for today. Seth Norman and his elite team from Teatros. Seth, please take it from there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and what a great video that was. I'm going to hop straight into this to make sure we make the best use of all of our time together. If you guys remember, we were here in January and we talked a lot about sort of the intersection of where stress and addiction and suicide come together. And, I wanted to start things off by, if I could, just recall one thing from that big introduction. It's what a serious problem this is in general, and then specifically within the construction industry. And so what brings us back is, after all the wonderful questions we got from you folks, a lot of the feedback, we realized that what we wanted to do was share now, instead of an academic introduction to the problems of addiction and suicide, now we want to get down at the ground level and provide some of the practical specifics so that if you're a leader or even just a coworker on a job site, what you can do practically to help address some of this problem. And the wonderful news is that we have some experts who you'll recognize. We also have some new experts, people who bring a lot of clinical experience to this, but also people who have been working for, in some cases over 40 years to help address exactly the issues we're talking about today. And they're going to help us understand what we can do as leaders on the job sites. And so right away, let me go ahead and hand things off to Dr. Kim Norman, who's going to introduce us to some of the keys for identifying people at risk. So please, Dr. Norman. Make sure you're unmuted. There you go.
Thank you. Yes. Well, thank you for having me. And wow, what a powerful video. I love that. And the theme of that video of "we have each other's back," I think is so critically important. And I think what the presentation is going to talk about today from all of the speakers is really, specific ways to have each other's back and to engage with one another in a way that is supportive and ultimately could be life-saving. Seth, could I have the next slide, please? So in looking for signs of suicide or being aware of signs of suicide, the first thing, of course, is is just having that awareness, to be aware that people can become suicidal. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 24. It's the fourth leading cause of death among people under the age of 55. Sometimes people who are hurting learn to be really good actors. They'll put on their social smile, they'll act like their normal selves, and you'll have no sign. So it's always good to check in with people with a very simple, how are you? And not how are you as in like, really saying hi to somebody you're walking past on a work site, but really, how are you? How's life going? How are you managing the stresses? Those kind of things. You'll hear more about that from other speakers a little bit later. In identifying people who may be at risk of suicide, the first thing to notice is any dramatic kind of change in behavior. People are normally gregarious, but now they're isolating. If they're normally talkative, but now they're quiet, or the opposite. People are behaving differently from their normal self. If you hear a lot of expression of negative emotions, feelings like I'm hopeless, there's no way out of this, I have no reason to live, excessive expressions of guilt and shame and failure, excessive and ongoing declarations of anger and rage that are different for this person. You also should look for or inquire about destructive behaviors, such as, has there been an increase in drug or alcohol use? Is somebody neglecting themselves? Are they no longer showering or shaving or taking care of their personal grooming in a way they normally do? Do you see a lot of anxiety, agitation, irritability? Ask about sleep. Sleeplessness is a sign often of imminent suicide risk. Also wonder about whether people have the same level of joy and interest and excitement, whether it's for their work, for hobbies, or for personal relationships. And then also really look for any kind of careless behavior. We know, as I said, suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 25, 24, 25. The leading cause of death is accidents among that demographic. We know that a number of deaths that are registered as accidents are actually subintentional suicide. It's not that the person had the plan or the intent of, I'm going to go to the bridge and jump off, or I'm going to take a firearm and shoot myself, but they are literally careless. They may be walking across the street, not really looking, driving recklessly, getting up on the roof in a thunderstorm to fix a problem that could wait. So we look for things like accident proneness, or statements like, nothing matters. A lot of times we know that fatal drug overdoses were subintentional suicidal, in that the person who took the drugs drank a lot of alcohol, took an opiate, added some fentanyl, kind of says, well, if I wake up, I wake up. If I don't, I don't really care, because nothing really matters anyway. So, so looking for that signs of literal carelessness, not caring enough about self-preservation. Also, sometimes people will describe a general feeling of numbness. I don't feel anything, and I need the adrenaline rush of some kind of reckless, dangerous behavior to feel it. People will disregard established safety measures, and they're no longer prudent or following common sense. They increase the use of drugs and alcohol, and they may have an increased desire for kind of violent confrontations. In fact, we know one subcategory of suicide is death by cop. People will get into a violent altercation, police are called, and they're literally provoking the police to go ahead and kill them. So these are under that category of subintentional suicide. So again, asking people about, are you caring for yourself? Are you caring about life? Are you taking care of yourself in a normal way? Are really important questions to ask. Now, specifically, to begin a conversation, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Dustin, who will take you through beginning a conversation.
Yeah, so the next part is really, like, how do we have that conversation? And I think that there's really a couple of different objectives that we have. One is to foster this culture of caring, this culture of support. And two is to really increase the person's sense of belongingness. Now, one thing it's not objective for is there's no expectation for you to be a mental health professional and assess the level of risk of somebody. This is really about how do you have that conversation when you start to identify some red flags. And so I'll go through these steps, and I'll also do sort of a mini dialogue with Seth to illustrate some of the ways you can have the conversation. The one thing to keep in mind is that, you know, even myself, I never say it perfectly, and the expectation is not to say it perfectly, but just that your authenticity and your caring comes out in the process. So the first thing is really to identify the specific behavior or change in behavior that you're concerned about. Now, like Dr. Norman said, it's really good to be able to just occasionally and generally ask a question about, you know, how are you doing, how are you caring for yourself. When you identify something, it's often helpful to be more specific about what you notice. So sometimes in general, if you ask the question, if I say, hey Seth, everything okay with you? Oh, I think you're muted, Seth.
Unmuted. That helps for the role play if I'm unmuted. Sorry, you can tell I'm not a professional actor. Can you ask it again? Sorry.
So, hey Seth, everything okay with you?
You know, yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm fine. It's just a little crazy today in my head somewhere else, but thanks for asking. I'm good, man.
So in that example, oftentimes when we ask something that's general, it can give somebody a way to deflect the question. So if you say something more specific about what you've noticed, so for example, if I say, hey Seth, I noticed you haven't been shooting the breeze as much with the guys. You've been off by yourself a lot in the last couple of weeks. That's not usually like you. You're usually the guy that's telling some lie about the fish you caught over the weekend. But seriously though, what's been going on?
Yeah, wow. You know, actually, I guess that is an issue. And if I'm being honest, things have been really crazy at home, and that's just taking up a lot of energy and attention, and I'm sorry. So yeah, I guess, you know, you're right. I haven't been as focused on work or you guys and hanging out as I should have been recently.
So that could be a good way to open up somebody to talk. I think the next part to really remember is to roll with the resistance. And what I mean by that is that sometimes people might not be in a place where they're willing to talk or ready to talk. And we always want to give them that option. We don't really want to push them to go to a place that they're really not ready to go to. So an example of that, you know, might be if I were to talk with Seth, like, hey Seth, you want to talk about what's been going on?
You know, actually, I really appreciate that, and I'm fine. But no, it's my personal business, and actually, I have somewhere to be. But thanks.
Hey, that's totally okay. You definitely don't have to talk if you don't want to. And I'm not trying to get into your personal business at all. I just want you to know that I'm here if you need to get something off your chest. And I'm really just, you know, I'm always just concerned about your safety and your well-being and how you're doing.
You know, thank you. Actually, I appreciate you saying that. I really don't know what I want to talk about at this moment, but you know, it is really nice. I can tell you really mean that, and I appreciate you saying it.
So by taking that position, we give an opportunity and a space for somebody to come to the table when or if they're ready. And that may also be never. They may not be willing to talk, but at least we've illustrated that there is a culture of caring and that we all care about this or about them. So if they are willing to talk, get asked directly without judgment, but also listen. The biggest key is to actively listen. Show somebody that you're listening to exactly what they're saying. So if Seth, you know, if Seth seemed like he were ready to talk, and he, you know, explained to me what was going on, it would be like that, like this.
Okay. Yeah, you know, to be honest, I do feel like things are bad at home. It's actually gotten so bad with my wife that I actually don't really know what to do to solve the problem. And to be honest, I just feel like I keep trying to make things right and I end up making them worse. And it's sort of like, what's the point of trying at this point? And, honestly, if I'm just going to keep making things worse every time I try and do something, I have to be honest, I kind of feel like my family would be just better off if I wasn't around, just gone or something.
And so to really illustrate some active listening on that is to be able to rephrase a little bit what Seth said. It's like, hey man, what I hear you saying is things are just not really so great right now with your wife, and you're feeling like there's nothing you can do. I can imagine that's a really tough position to be in.
Yeah, I guess that is, yeah, thank you for putting it succinctly. That is how I'm feeling. Thank you for saying that.
And then from there, you can normalize what they're going through, or normalize, or we often call it validating. Letting somebody know that they're not alone in what they're experiencing. And that can come in a few different forms. It can come in, letting people know that other people have experienced this. It could also be sharing something that you've been through, if you're willing to share it, that can convey that you have some familiarity with what they may be going through. Just keep in mind, it's not about sort of one-upping or trying to say that that there's a worse situation out there. If someone were to say, talk about how things are really, really bad at home, to respond with, yeah, I totally know what that means. The Steelers got knocked out of the playoffs and I was pretty bummed. Make sure that it's in line with what they're going through. So just to kind of give an example of that, I could be like, Seth, to be honest, I was having some problems with my wife some time ago, and I didn't know how to handle it. I was having some pretty scary thoughts, but I ended up going to talk with a professional, and it really helped me out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what I want now, but maybe I'll come back and ask you about that again sometime.
Exactly. And the last thing is really to know what your boundary is, and if you can help them find resources, or give them options for resources that they can go to. It might be something like, hey, there's a suicide hotline out there. There's AA meetings that you can go to. Maybe might be beneficial for you to go to employee assistance and or book an appointment with a mental health professional. It can help them to identify the options, but also gives them the autonomy to go and act when they feel it's appropriate. You can also know your boundary by setting, know what you're willing to, how much you're willing to support. If you're willing to go and say, hey, I'll sit with you while you make an appointment, or while you make a call, that's okay. There's no obligation to do that. It's, if you feel comfortable with that, that's great. If not, you can be like, hey, here's these resources that you can go to, or maybe there's somebody I can connect you with that can help you along. But altogether, like I say, the dialogue's never perfect, but if you can convey that you care and you're authentic and you're kind, that comes through more than any of the words that you choose to do it with.
Okay. And then now, so thank you, Dustin. And now we'll wrap up. Mahima is, we've walked through these steps of helping spot people with potentially at risk for suicide. We've gone over some of the techniques for engaging those folks and digging a little deeper to seeing what might be done. Now what we want to wrap up with is some tips on how we create organizations, work sites, relationships, whatever you want to call it, that actually help prevent people from getting to this point in the first place. So please, Mahima.
Thank you, Seth. What I want to start with is actually talking a little bit about trauma. And I'll get in a minute. I'll tell you a little bit about why we're even bringing this framework to light in this conversation. And I think in general, this word trauma, it triggers a lot of feelings for a lot of folks, right? So on the one end of the spectrum, some people think trauma is underused, and some people think that it's overused. But the reality is trauma has become this psychological phenomenon that a lot of people seem to stereotypically think that it belongs in the category of abuse. You know, if you've suffered some kind of abuse, there's an impact and that's traumatic. PTSD. But the reality is trauma is actually more pervasive than clinically diagnosable conditions like PTSD. And when we think about trauma, we're actually talking about a framework, a certain set of principles, certain ways of being in the world together. And that is why I think talking about trauma is really important. So what is trauma? So the simplest definition of trauma, it can be either one event or a series of events that actually exceeds our capacity to cope emotionally. So this is different from a difficult experience, if you will, right? Maybe I'm, woke up late this morning and rushing to get ready and I'm feeling a lot of stress. That's a really difficult experience, but I still have some things within my emotional coping capacity to actually make that happen. I may show up late, may feel embarrassed, but I can generally survive it. But when you're talking about trauma, you're actually talking about not having any emotional resources that you typically rely on to make it through and make it work. And as a community, the reason we're talking about trauma is that you've all experienced the loss of several of your members, either to suicide or through addiction. And that is a collective trauma that you are all experiencing that should be named and acknowledged. And again, why should we talk about trauma? Talking about trauma does two things in a really significant way. One, it destigmatizes what trauma is, right? And kind of normalizes the experience. And second, it really offers a clear path towards healing. And if you haven't acknowledged trauma, then healing becomes a much harder path. So there's a direct link between acknowledging and healing. And then lastly, who is a trauma-informed leader? And the reason we're sticking to kind of a leadership lens, but this is true of really anyone on a team. If you're on a team, there's a trauma-informed leadership expectation that can become the norm. The first thing is that a trauma-informed leader actually acknowledges trauma, doesn't dismiss it. They do everything in their power to kind of minimize re-traumatization, by which I mean, for example, there may be a team meeting that you're hosting and there could be a joke about someone's mental health or minimizing feelings in general, right? And it's done in a really casual, colloquial kind of way. But that could be very traumatizing to somebody else in the group who's struggling, who is maybe has tried in their own way to come forward, but has stopped short of that, haven't felt the safety to be able to do that. And that could be a very re-traumatizing experience. So actually owning, taking time to talk about trauma and acknowledging it also helps you to not re-traumatize folks. And then the last thing of the hallmark of a trauma-informed leader is actually someone who brings evidence-based thinking and solutions to their team. So it means educating yourself about what are the best ways to work, solutions that work for folks who need additional help on your team. How are they scientifically kind of grounded and proven? And taking time to actually educate yourself and bring those solutions to your teams actually is another component of being a trauma-informed leader. Go to the next slide, please. So I listed out for us a few of the basic principles of trauma-informed care in general, and this applies to leadership as well. And when you see and notice team members who are struggling, these principles come in really handy. So Dustin and Seth really walked us through kind of a role play of how you might have conversations. But these principles kind of offer you a lens to think through how you want to set up your team dynamics on the whole. And we'll start with trust, which is a big one, right? People are not going to come and share things unless there's some built trust. And to Dustin's point previously about rolling with the resistance, it may take many attempts to prove that you are trustworthy, but actually speaking openly on a team about this is an important value for this team actually goes a much longer way than sometimes we even think. And so focusing on trust as a principle, really important. Giving some choice. Sometimes it's good to offer choice in a way that the other person doesn't feel trapped, right? So if they're needing some help from you immediately and you go in and say, you have to do this right now, may not go really well. But if you're able to say, here's option A, here's option B, but I want to be really clear that you have to do something that's going to help you. It's a very different way to offer someone some room in what they might choose, but with a hard limit still associated to that. Transparency is the third one, which is being really clear what you intend to do with someone's disclosure or the information that they've shared with you. A lot of times people are afraid to come forth and ask for help because they don't know what you're going to do with the information. If I tell you that I am struggling emotionally, does that mean I'm not going to get the next gig? Am I seen as a weak person on the team? And so being clear and telling people that, you're asking so you can be helpful to them. And there isn't an ulterior motive to the information that you're asking for. You're not going to misuse the information. What is the guideline around confidentiality? So that kind of transparency, really helpful. And then cultural humility. This is actually taking the time to know people on your team and what their cultural locations are, right? So for some folks, maybe faith-based interventions would work really, really well because there is a strong connection to their faith. They believe in their faith. And so providing some resources that speak to that will go much longer way than anything else. But for more marginalized members on your team, they may not trust the systems that are in place, the healthcare system, for example, or calling a suicide hotline. So being sensitive to that, maybe even naming that before they can bring it up, can really ease some of that tension and show them that you're thoughtful about it, right? And then the last one on here is collaboration, and obviously kind of self-explanatory, but just to highlight on this, I think inviting somebody to participate in kind of figuring out a solution together goes a much longer way than just saying this, you're going to do it because I said so. Doesn't work most of the times for anything. It doesn't work for this kind of conversation either. All right, Seth, can we move to the next slide? Okay, so let me walk you through a few things about how you create a trauma-informed team. The first thing on my list was to actually demonstrate that you have comfort as a team naming difficult subjects, right? So typically what happens is the topic of suicide in particular, it gets avoided because there's a lot of fear that if you say the word suicide to someone who you think may be struggling, that you're actually going to push them more towards that intent. In fact, the opposite is true. It's actually relieving for folks who are already suicidal to hear somebody acknowledge that and offer some support. So not to be afraid to actually use the right words to name it directly. Establishing a routine for checking in with your team. So this can't usually be a one-time conversation. You really have to put some effort into maybe every team meeting. If you have a weekly team meeting, for example, carving out the first 5 or 10 minutes to intentionally focus on how everyone's doing emotionally. So it's kind of a normalized shared experience. And then if somebody's struggling, you have already built some trust enough as a group for them to be able to share. But you can't go in and just ask that one time and be done with it. So having a practice around it is really important. The third one is, it is okay to not have all the answers. And I think this is another big anxiety that comes up for leaders in particular, that if I ask you and you tell me you need help and I don't know what to do with it, I'd rather just avoid having that conversation. Even though you don't have all the right answers together, just communicating in an authentic way that you are here together to figure it out if you don't know the answer goes a much longer way than avoiding the conversation. Inviting your team to brainstorm ideas. I think this is actually one of our favorite things to do at Teatros. We do this a lot. We're a post-it kind of team, but it really makes the experience of feeling like your voice is heard and buy-in, right? When you've all come up with the ideas together, there's more buy-in in general. And so this is true of well-being initiatives that you want to take on. Have everyone in the team participate in some way that they can. Think about different ways of communication. Humor, when used appropriately, can go a really long way. I think it can lighten folks enough on a team to even share. Think about, I had a really close friend who, whenever she has a kind of a emotionally hard experience, prefers to leave me a voice memo instead of actually getting on the phone and talking to me or leaving a voicemail. And this voice memo back and forth is really regulating and calming, because I think it takes away the anxiety of having to talk to even me, who, I'm one of her closest friends. So just get to know the people on your team. How do they prefer to communicate? Maybe a text goes a much longer way than an actual conversation, but if you know that, it gives you a chance to actually do that better. And then the last one I want to point out is just establishing your boundaries as a leader. So this is to say, don't overpromise things that are beyond your ability, right? One way this might show up is casually saying to someone, hey, you can call me any time of the day. I'm going to be here. You've told me you're having a hard time. Just call me anytime. This person may call you at 12 a.m. and you don't answer the phone. So it's not a promise you may be able to keep up just based on your own life experience and what's going on, right? So be really clear about, this is what I can do. This is my limit. Even if you don't share it with the person, I think having some internal sense of what is that limit for yourself is really important, so you don't overpromise or overcommit, and then leads to disappointment, right? And then the last thing I'll say is, being a trauma-informed leader is also being an activist in your own right, and advocating for the right policies. If there are things that aren't working organizationally, just reaching out to your leadership to advocate on behalf of the folks who need your help, also is part of being a trauma-informed leader. So with that, Seth.
Excellent. Thank you, Mima. So I'm going to wrap up real quick here. Tell you a little bit about the Teatros tool and some of the conversations we've been having with you folks. But the big thing I want to do, if I could, if the team will allow me to summarize all of what they've just said over the last 45 minutes into just a few sentences, it's really that when it comes to having difficult conversations like this, you get the A for effort. There's, of course, a lot of science behind the right way to do things. It is important that you educate yourself and refer to materials like the ones we'll leave here, on video or in our slide deck. But really, at the end of the day, what's going to come through is how much you care. And people will appreciate that connection and the effort. And that's where this becomes, everything we've shown you becomes less science and more art. The more you practice having open conversations with your teammates, whether it's about suicide or anything, you're going to have more success. And really what's going to shine through is that you guys care. And what I have to, say in general, we got to talk a little bit about the Teatros tool when we were here in January. We've had more follow-on conversations with some of the different leaders throughout the construction industry. And what I really have come to appreciate is there is a family atmosphere, a care for your fellow man and coworker within your organizations that really the only place I can think of that I've ever seen in my life that is at the same level is the military. And it makes sense that a lot of military folks end up in your organizations. And so really, what the Teatros tool does is provide a safe place for people on your teams to come together, within a secure environment, gives them some of the tools to prompt these difficult conversations, gives you some resources to cope with difficult times. Really what I appreciate about all of you folks in the audience today, though, is you understand that there is no magic bullet for solving all of these problems. Or if there is a magic bullet, the magic bullet is communities like yours who really care about trying and working with folks. As we mentioned, It may take many, many conversations to make someone realize, hey, they need some help and you can help them get that help. It's the same way with Teatros. We're giving you lots of different avenues and exercises and training types, but mostly we're giving you a group of your peers because you never know who that person that you'll stumble across who will deliver the message in the right way and the support in the way that really resonates with a person in need. And so I wanted to just close by saying thank you very much for having us back. We really like presenting to this audience because you guys take the love and care of each other very, very seriously. And that's always something that we want to get behind and be a part of. So we also built in a little, last time we felt like we didn't have enough time for questions because there were so many good ones coming through. And so, you know, Kevin, if you want to close, but mostly we're just very happy to hear any questions you have and to answer them now. Thank you.
Well, that's very, very kind of you, Seth, and thank you and Dustin and Kim and Mahima for providing a really practical guide to an intervention that might happen and how to handle it. You know, I think I speak for a lot of people who say you can go on and you can watch a webinar or you can attend an event or have a one-on-one. And I think in the series that you just did, you hit every stereotypical thing. You know, call me anytime. Yeah, well, sorry, I'm in the middle of a webinar. I can't answer right now. You know, so that's really very powerful. I've got Kevin Burns here with me, the Chief of Staff, and we've talked many times, both Burns and I, as well as members of the ironworker leadership and contractor leadership, and we have them all online here today. You know, we've got end users, the highest levels of the ironworkers and the highest levels of our contractors, but we are talking about potential easy ways to get to help. And we're talking about hard hat stickers. So Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the great presentation, Seth and your team. So in some of the positions I've held being an ironworker, whether it's an apprentice instructor, apprentice coordinator, an elected officer of the local, or running work for a contractor, you know, there's always those telltale signs where you get to really know people, whether it's in an apprentice class or your members that come in looking for work, or if you're running work as a contractor and you're in a supervisory position for the ironworkers for one of our signatory contractors. I think Seth and your team, you gave us some really good tools to have that open conversation, you know, with someone, and not more or less say, hey, you know, something's not clicking with you. You don't seem right, you know, or if you know someone's going through a divorce or a tough time, or, you know, when I can think back on times when I was running work and you're getting ready to go to work and you see guys coming on to the job site and you know that guy's just off. It's not the usual, hey, how's it going, Burns? You know, so being knowledgeable and pulling that guy aside when the timing is right and say, hey, is everything all right? And, you know, and maybe they'll share with you that, hey, I'm going through a divorce, or my kid is having a rough time and it's really affecting my sleep, and my wife and I are both worried about it and it's affecting me at work, or I got a couple of members that I know are going through some substance use disorders and I'm really struggling on how to help them out. So all these tools, there is no one silver answer to trying to help someone, but I think an open conversation whenever you can, or sharing things that might have happened to you. Like you said, hey, I remember when I went through this, or, you know, went through this traumatic event where I lost a loved one and I really felt down in the dumps. Having that conversation might open up a dialogue with that person that might be going through something just as similar as you are. So, and then what you said too, I mean, a lot of the suicides you hear, I've heard it myself from people saying that, you know, I think I can't really kick this addiction. And we all know that usually with addictions, people go in, it's not highly unusual to get better in one time with going away for help. You know, it's pretty common that, you know, you fall off the wagon one time, 2 times, 3 times. It might take 4 times in a treatment center before that light goes on and you're able to straighten your life out. So just being aware that, you know, people struggle every day, and having that conversation and that openness to try to remove the stigma of people looking for help might be one of the ways we help each other out, right? Having that conversation when your apprentice class comes to school, hey, everybody all right here? Or, or having people share stories, having a conversation during a union meeting, saying that, hey, look, we're all going through a rough time. We know that this pandemic, people have really struggled during the last year with being isolated, the lack of work, and just being home and not being able to go out to restaurants and concerts and things like that. It's triggered a lot of, emotions, and people have fallen off the wagon, and isolation turns into depression and things like that. So just, having that open conversation of how we can help people out, I think is important. And a lot of the tools that Teatros just mentioned to us, and having those conversations and the role playing that you did earlier, really helpful. Thank you very much. Kevin, I'll turn it back over.
Okay, we've got a couple of Q&As pouring in here as well as I just saw a chat pop up. And again, these are typically very unvarnished stuff. One was hoping to hear more about addiction issues. We, and this was a very specific person who asked us, we're going to continue these things, and we're going to hear about more about dealing with addiction, because we know it's very prevalent, and it's very, very difficult, and we're not going to stop here. Trust me. It's going to keep going. This is one I've heard of members that committed suicide afterward talking to other members on the same crew, 7 other guys. They all knew it was coming as the member showed and talked of thoughts of doing something. I have since always tried to advertise to our members that they can be involved to watch for the signs and reach out to prevent help. I throw that out to any of you experts. I mean, is it a fine line between, intervening, or how do you deal with something, that situation?
Yeah, maybe I can start, and of course others can join in. Survivor guilt is part of surviving someone someone you were close to, a coworker or a loved one who completes suicide. And, it all the more speaks to really the theme of this presentation, which is to have those conversations. You can't be responsible for somebody else's life. You can't be the one whose job it is to keep somebody else safe. But you can have a conversation. If you notice somebody isn't themselves, if you notice they're hurting, never be shy about asking if you're thinking about hurting yourself. To normalize it, to say, very common when people are in pain, to have thoughts of self-harm. How are you doing with that? And then if they do acknowledge that they're having those thoughts, then a warm handoff to somebody in employee assistance, calling the professional who can help them and sit with them while they make that call, I think is really important. I do want to make one other comment that this question really brings up for me. There is a phenomenon around suicide called suicide contagion. And what happens sometimes, if one person, particularly if the person is a celebrity or a leader, takes his or her life, sometimes that gives permission for other people who've been thinking about suicide to go ahead and, make a suicide attempt themselves. And I think it's really important, while we honor the life of somebody who has died by suicide, and we certainly understand, we don't judge, we understand the pain that person was in, we understand they weren't themselves, we understand whether it was drugs, depression, their brain was different, and so we forgive them, we understand it, we don't judge it, and at the same time, it's really important that we don't give permission for it either. We don't in no way do we glorify it or accept it.
It's a really fine line, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. But you know what? Watching that 3-minute video, your team, your group, that line. I mean, it's setting that tone, the authentic, loving tone. We have your back. We care about you. We're not judging you. We're here to be supportive and to be friends and to help you get the professional help you need should your level of suffering, rise to that level.
Right.
So here's another one. Oh, go ahead, Mahima.
I was just going to quickly add something to what Kim was saying. We use this a lot with a lot of folks we work with. You don't actually have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. right? And I think a lot of times we think that you have to have a certain kind of qualification, it's a professional, which is all true. You know, I think to Kim's point, we're not training folks to do safety assessments or be responsible for the care, but we can be therapeutic, and you don't need to be a therapist. And I actually thought your video is a therapeutic intervention, right? Because it really evokes the care and the concern and will bring a lot of folks forward, and that's therapeutic in its own right. So just wanted to point that out.
So we've got another question here that I think this is very typical, and I'm surprised it has been asked earlier. How to get through to the tough guy, badass persona. And, you know, all the ironworkers I work with, you know, 99% are alpha males, and, you know, they don't want to admit any weakness whatsoever, that they can't do anything. How do you get through to that?
Great question. I think the first thing is to say that it takes courage to be honest with yourself. It takes courage to share your pain with someone else. It takes courage to get help when you need it. And there's no shame in acknowledging I'm a human being under stress. I can get depressed. I can have panic attacks. I can drink too much. I can have thoughts of hopelessness and suicide, and seeking help, you know, is really showing courage, not weakness. I like the way that the military does it. That when they teach about mental health challenges, they call it comprehensive fitness. And part of comprehensive fitness is being strong, body, mind, and spirit. When we say health, we mean body, mind, and spirit. And if we can embrace that principle as a principle of health, reaching out for help when I need it is a strength, not a weakness.
Great. That's really, that I'd never heard that before. I don't know if anybody else has. And I live in a neighborhood where you can't swing a dead cat without hitting some kind of military guy. That's great information. Got a question here. Can we possibly get a Toolbox Talk? And for those of you not in the construction industry, it's usually a safety talk at the beginning of the shift, made up with talking points so that we can get the conversation going at the lunchroom/job shack levels. That way our site foreman will have something with them and with the same message to follow. So, you know, that's also something that, you know.
I have to say, you know, we're gonna happily provide our deck today, and we're also, if people reach out to us, happy to provide some of those instruments that may help you have those conversations. And what I really wanna stress from that, you know, is I have not worked in the construction industry, but I was in the military. And one thing that the military made me wary of was sort of the boilerplate standardized, you know, here's the list of things to do no matter what. And, you know, don't get me wrong, having these you should have these materials, you should review them and practice them, but you should use them as a starting point to develop your own language. Every team in every city, in every, you know, specific job site is going to have a slightly different set of vocabulary and language that they use with each other. And so I'll close by saying we're more than happy to provide some of those materials that might help you put that together, but don't be afraid to be, you know, if you're in charge of one person, 5 people, if you're just in charge of yourself, don't be afraid to think of yourself as a leader in developing some of the tools that make sense for your own community.
We got another question here. UID, one of the signs of someone having difficulty is disregarding safety measures. Just wondering if safety folks, so, you know, every contractor has a safety, at least one safety professional. We have a whole safety and health department here at the Ironworkers and Impact. Just wondering if safety folks have considered / incorporated this insight when they investigate incidents or near misses, and if anyone can share ways they put this into practice. And I think that's probably a question for our safety professionals. Russ, great question, and we'll pass this along to the Ironworker Safety and Health Department.
Thank you. That is a great question, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to emphasize the phenomenon of subintentional suicidal behavior, literal carelessness, that sometimes people who are accident prone are literally not caring enough about self-preservation, and in fact ought to be part of this, in my opinion, ought to be part of a safety investigation when there is an incident.
Yeah. Vincent writes in, mental health matters. Let the members know that whoever you feel comfortable with reaching out to them to get the help you need. So it goes back to Mahima's point that just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you can't be therapeutic and help other people. Again, I thought that the stuff you brought today was very, very practical. Another question, is the video produced by Local 7 available for download? I'd like to share it with our crew if possible. Absolutely, positively. Again, these slides you heard today, the recorded session, and of course the Local 7 video, which I thought was extraordinarily well done, will be available for download. And one of the reasons we put it on is we thought it would spur contractors and local unions to start the same type of thing. I mean, you know, I'm not an iron worker, full disclosure, but I suspect, and I'll turn it over to Bernsey, that if other iron workers see these alpha males walking into the AA meeting, that'll break down some of the stigma attached thereof too.
No, I just put it out to a challenge to everybody out there that's running a local to open up your doors for AA meetings, NA meetings. The ironworkers under General President Dean's guidance has said, we will never have a major conference or convention without having some type of breakout session available for someone for AA meetings, NA meetings. We talked about it earlier where, you know, we're quick to say, okay, we got an open bar for the next half hour for all the participants. Well, we're going to be just as quick to say, and for those of you would like to go to an AA or NA meeting, we have people that have already stepped in leadership positions and say, hey, I'll take that. I'll run that meeting, that AA meeting or NA meeting at the next conference, wherever it is. So we're going to make sure that, you know, we hit on that point too.
Yeah, and I really want to underscore, we have lots and lots of studies of suicide prevention. And what comes through very clearly is the knowledge that somebody cares about me as a person is a huge impact in preventing suicide. So that's embodied in that 3-minute video. We care, we have your back, we're a fellowship. That knowledge in and of itself is extremely potent in preventing suicide.
Well, before we sign off here, I'm gonna give 2 quick plugs. Number one, I know most of the Teatros team, if not all, is based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We'll be there next February, live and in person, God willing. And I feel very confident we'll be at the Hilton Union Square in February for the annual Impact event. We hope you're invited, the Teatros team, to meet everybody live and in person. We'd love to have you. And the other piece is I would ask everybody online and your friends to tune in on May 13th at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time, for an issue where we actually have a discussion between Cal Byer, who's appeared here before, and Brad Churchill, one of our really good, outstanding, really contractors, to talk about an event in Brad's life that is highly impactful. And we will continue the discussion on addiction prevention and suicide prevention until we really get a grasp on it. You know, we're going to win. I guarantee that. So again, thank you, Teatros team. Thank you, Chief of Staff Burns. And we look forward to seeing you again, the not too distant future. And thanks for everybody tuned in. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great
Bye.
rest of your day.